Our meeting to order, the October 2nd. October sure slipped up quickly. The October 2nd Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Commissioners, y'all have had those for about a week. Are there any additions or changes?
I have just one correction on that. Emily, on the first page there, what I said was the gabion wells can silt up, not fill up.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other changes? If not, I'll accept a motion.
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say no.
Abstain.
Two abstentions. All right, first item on the agenda is a public hearing to consider a request of the City of Fairhope Planning and Zoning Department for a proposed amendment to Article 3, Section D.9, accessory dwelling units of ordinance number 1253, known as the zoning ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is as you remember, we tabled this one from the last meeting until tonight. We did go back and took some comments from the meeting and made a few changes to it. We did put a size on it. 50% of the accessory dwelling cannot be any larger than 50% of the principal dwelling to make sure it's incompatible with the principal dwelling and also the neighborhood from that perspective. And I'll just read kind of the changes. As it stands right now, you cannot have a kitchen. As you can see from your packet here, the stricken language is what's currently exists. And the first one, it says, any accessory structure shall only have a half bath. Kitchens and electrical wiring or gas-supported kitchens are prohibited. So that right there eliminates a dwelling unit. So it's really not a dwelling unit. It's really an accessory use, I guess. What we are proposing is to remove those two provisions so you can actually have an accessory dwelling with a bath and kitchen and so forth. Again, the restrictions that we are discussing are underlined in your packet, and I'll just read them real quickly, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. On 4, it says the principal dwelling unit located on a parcel or land containing an accessory dwelling shall be occupied by the owner. So the principal dwelling must be occupied by the owner. Occupants of the accessory dwelling must be a single family as defined by the term family in Article 9 of the zoning ordinance and only permitted in allowable zoning districts. An accessory dwelling shall meet the same parking requirements of a principal dwelling. Any residential accessory dwelling must comply with Article 3, Section C of the zoning district's dimensions and standards, which provides the setbacks and so forth for that, and maximum rear yard percentages you can occupy with an accessory dwelling. An accessory dwelling shall not exceed 50% of the square footage of the base floor area of the principal dwelling or 1,100 square feet, whichever is less. Only one accessory dwelling unit per parcel is permitted. The accessory dwelling unit height shall not exceed the height of the principal structure, and manufactured homes may not be used as an accessory dwelling unit. So those are the proposals we're making. Again, at the last meeting, we discussed what we feel like are the merits of an accessory dwelling. It does allow you to have potentially, if you have maybe someone or a parent or an elderly parent to live near you, so you can provide care to them if necessary. Potentially, maybe an adult child who's starting their career, have a place to stay with a little independence. Also, it just provides some affordable housing to some. It's pretty standard. I know that the county allows accessory dwelling units, and most of the cities do as well. So we're wanting to try to realign ourselves with the typical regulations you might have for accessory dwellings. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Art.
I got a comment. I was going to ask a question.
Why don't we open the public hearing first and then do that? Okay. I'll go ahead at this time and open the public hearing. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, or thoughts about the accessory dwelling ordinance changes?
I didn't have any.
Okay. If not, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Ralph?
Wayne, I have two questions. One of them is an addition, and that is on line, just lost it right here. No, line 30. manufactured homes may not be used as an accessory dwelling unit. I worked with the Louisiana Manufactured Housing Association, had a chair in their name for a couple of years. I got a real education. A lot of places, accessory dwelling units are in fact manufactured homes.
Right.
And would that mean that the alternative would be any accessory dwelling unit would have to be stick-built? It couldn't be a prefab unit or anything like that?
That's the current proposal. I got some feedback from a couple of people dealing with that, and that was a concern that expressed. Now, I mean, I know that you and I think of, a lot of people have seen very, very nice manufactured housing, or, I think that the typical person thinks of a certain type of housing that may not be what we're thinking about. Again, that was something that I was trying to respond to some concerns, but again, from my perspective, I don't think that's, I mean, I know that the things you can do these days with the manufactured homes, and
Because the American Law Institute in their model ordinance does not prohibit them.
right.
It might be something we might want to consider. I think just ruling out a particular kind of dwelling unit, when many other more up-to-date codes and so forth are allowing them, because these new dwelling units can meet code.
Sure.
I think that's the critical part, that you
I'm
don't,
sorry?
I think that's the critical point, because I had the same concern that
Good.
I think prefabricated elements might be very appealing to somebody building in their own backyard.
Right.
But you wouldn't, some manufactured homes just meeting the separate HUD code, I mean, we wouldn't, that would be a lesser quality, or, a trailer meeting that code. So if we could could we possibly tie it to the building code
Yes.
Sure.
instead
agree
of
with
whether it's prefabricated or not?
Sure. We can do
That's
that's
a
not,
watered-down code.
It's tied to the building code already, isn't it?
it is. I mean, any kind of manufactured home has to meet the building code, and any kind of wind, all the building code issues that go with that, with tie downs, those kind of things would be required if it's. But I think I
Well,
understand
there's
what
a
we're.
separate HUD code for manufactured dwellings
Well,
that has the lesser standards.
I think from my experience, the biggest difference between a manufactured home is they are inspected in the factory and they're brought to the site.
Yeah.
Typically, stick-built homes are inspected while they're under construction. These manufactured homes they're inspected at the factory under construction,
Yeah.
and they're brought to a location.
The most important thing would be that they would meet all of our wind guidelines, since Fairhope's not allowed to, since Fairhope's not allowed legally to have people in a shelter.
Right. That's right.
We would still have to inspect them being attached to a foundation.
It would be. They had to be inspected for any kind of, foundation, tie down, whatever it is. It would have to meet that. It would require a permit, first of all, and that would trigger all the necessary reviews that would come with that permit.
Yeah. Okay. The other question I had in there, on line 23, an accessory dwelling unit shall meet the same parking requirements of a principal dwelling. How exactly is that going to work?
Right now, for a single-family home, you're required 2 parking spaces per
Right.
dwelling. With an accessory dwelling, you're required 1.
So in other words, you would have to add another parking space to the principal structure in order to be able to put an accessory structure in?
You would have to add it somewhere on the lot to comply with that section to make sure that you had adequate parking. What we don't want to see, we're adding a structure, a residence to a property. With that comes cars and vehicles. What we don't want to see, and it's something that I've experienced in previous places, is you have.
I could just suggest that you might want to put some clarifying language in there so somebody would know what that meant. Because I assumed that meant that they would have to have another parking space in addition to the 2, which is normal for the principal
Right,
residence.
and they would. Okay, we can clarify that. What we don't want to see is have people parking on the street and those kind of things, and the congestion that causes. We need to be on-site parking provided.
Yeah,
But we can certainly clarify that.
okay.
Can you explain line 21, the term single family?
Mm-hmm. I don't have it in front of me. It's single family. It had to be related. Nancy, do you have that definition? I can read it to you. Another concern that I heard is this may turn into, you may have a lot of rentals, for example, that got multiple people renting multiple pieces on the property, which almost turns into more of a rental type.
Wayne, I think Mr. Robinson will corroborate it. The Supreme Court has a definition of what constitutes a single family.
Mm-hmm. I agree. In an ordinance, we have a definition of family in the ordinance.
People related to blood, marriage, or adoption.
But that's not talking about short-term versus long-term. That's just basically saying
Defining,
not for college kids.
right, living in it and then having an accessory dwelling unit behind it, right?
Got it. Thank you.
But the way it's written, it almost sounds like it precludes just an individual living there.
I'm sorry?
It sounds like occupants must be a single family. You could also rent to just an individual. Or does that mean you couldn't rent to two people? Or it seems.
What we're trying to do is, it was mentioned a minute ago, like having a bunch of college kids living in such. I don't think that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to limit. So it is a family living in that accessory, be it one person or whatever, that they are a family, not multiple people renting it.
Well, that's what I meant. Is one person considered a family?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Are two people who aren't married considered a family?
No.
It's blood, adoption, and something else. I forgot what it is. It's another affiliation.
Yeah. This is from our ordinance in Fairhope. It says one or more persons occupying a single dwelling unit and using common cooking facilities, provided that unless all members are related by blood, adoption, or marriage, no such family shall contain over 5 persons.
That's it.
That's the current definition in our zoning ordinance. So it does link back to what Ken was saying with the blood, relatives, so forth.
Anything further? And you want us to make a, sorry?
On the manufactured housing thing, is that like for RVs and other?
And an RV would not be considered a manufactured home.
Okay.
What, do we have
They're
a,
not, they're not allowed at all then? I mean, you can't put an RV behind there. and call
And
it-
live in it, no.
what about do we have a definition in our ordinances for manufactured home?
That I have not looked at, Councilman. Nancy, you want to look at that real quick? Manufactured home?
Maybe it's, I mean, to rule out RVs or anything else that's not a full code compliant building, it might be as simple as, manufactured homes may not be used as accessory or just accessory dwelling units must meet the full building code. All the requirements as the principal structure.
This is the definition of manufactured home. A structure that is governed by the federal manufactured home construction and safety standards established by the National Manufacturers Home Construction and Safety Standards Act, 42 U.S.C. Section 5403.
Right.
That clears it right up then.
You may pull out Section 5403 from the
Well,
United
see,
States Code.
there are manufactured, not to muddy it more, but there's people making manufactured homes that meet the International Building Code,
Yeah.
not the watered-down HUD code.
Right.
So
I'm
it
I'm just thinking. I mean, when I hear manufactured home, I think of mobile home.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of on
But those
the
are
same. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but somebody bringing an RV in their backyard and consider it an accessory dwelling, and somebody pulling a trailer in their backyard and consider that as, I mean, that would not.
But it doesn't have a foundation, so if it had to meet the building code, it would have to have a full,
Right, okay.
that couldn't happen because it'd have to be tied down and have a real foundation
Absolutely.
and be a real building. Yeah, I mean, you can't stop ugly, but you can define quality
Right,
and
right,
health,
right, right. I
safety,
just-
and welfare.
I think our protection comes with the building code. Just as long as we have that, then that kind of clarifies that it all, ends up there.
I agree. You want us to make a recommendation for the city council to,
Yes, sir.
Approve this
If it's the wish of the planning commission to move it forward, or if you want to work on it more, we can bring it back again. It's up to you. There is no immediate rush with this. We could work on it more and bring it back, or if you can afford the city council, we can make the changes we talked about and adjust it, and send it on to them during that process. It's whatever the wishes of the commission is.
I just have one minor question. I definitely don't want to hold it up because I think this is a really positive thing for Fairhope. But it just seemed like number 16 and number, where did it go? 26 were sort of stating the same thing, and so it's just sort of a cleanup. Could we just state that once?
Sure. I'm sorry, and you're exactly right. We can. We can go back and merge those two together and make sure they match.
Great.
if you'd like to make the motion on that, they've either got to change it and bring it back, or you can make a motion subject to, if you would like to.
Okay, well, I'll take a shot at it because I was going to try to incorporate both. But could I make a motion that we recommend approval subject to number line 16 and line 26 being consolidated, and subject to I doing too much? Line 30, being clarified to be tied to the building code, same building code as all residences.
I'll second that motion.
I've got a motion and a second. Emily, do you have that?
I do.
Okay, and then make sure you look in the minutes next meeting to make sure everything looks like you expected it. That goes under any further comments, and that's my further comment. Are there any other further comments? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously to recommend, with a few minor changes, the accessory dwelling units. Good job on that
Thank you.
project. All right, next item on the agenda is public hearing to request the City of Fairhope Planning and Zoning Department for a proposed amendment to Article 2, Section C2, Ordinance 1253, known as the zoning ordinance regarding site plan reviews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a pretty lengthy and a little more complex amendment. What I'd like to do, if it's okay with the commission, is just get some comments tonight. We have a companion document that goes with this that we want to bring up that's a lot less complicated at the next planning commission meeting. So if we could, I'd just like to maybe have a discussion tonight and hold this over until the next month. But primarily what we're trying to do in a general sense, we're trying to, as you know, we have certain triggers in our zoning ordinance now that require site plan review. That site plan review comes to the planning commission and it's approved by the city council. We would like to try to focus much more on planning with the site plan reviews and not get bogged down in some of the technical engineering standards. That would come after this process. So we look a lot more closely at the planning aspects, how it affects the community, compatibility, those kind of things. And so that's the kind of the gist of this. Also, there's some expiration language in there. There's some amendment language for site plans. But I think the most salient issues are under applicability, which when this would apply. And if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I'll read those.
Certainly.
And if you look at line 9A, it says applicability, a site plan review is required in accordance with the following. A zoning map amendment when the amendment is an office, retail, service, or manufacturing use or described in Article 3B, Table 3.1. So that would mean that basically any kind of commercial amendment would have to have an accompanying site plan with that.
This, which we have here, that first piece of paper that was sent out, that you had to follow it up with the site plan, it's a little confusing to me. The attached is a proposed amendment, below is the current language, and the proposed language is attached as a draft. This one paragraph, does this survive? Does this become part of the new draft?
No, this would replace the current section.
It's like a preface to zoning and planning members as to what we should focus on. I didn't see that as intrusive, but I was going to take that out. I wasn't sure that it was coming out or staying in.
Right. Yeah, this would replace, the amendment you have, the strike through underline version would replace the whole section. So it's all underlined as a replacement to the whole language, and we're expanding it in some areas. So it's basically a replacement. But back to the applicability, it's, again, any kind of commercial amendment, rezoning for a commercial use would require a site plan. And the amendment is a two-family, multifamily apartment or mixed-use project would all, again, require a site plan for two-family, multifamily, or mixed use. And in the CBD, and this kind of mirrors the current language, the format of the current language. In the CBD, when the gross floor area exceeds 10,000 square feet, it would require a site plan. And when the impervious surface ratio exceeds 30%, and that is exactly how it's written today. We haven't changed that at all. That's the same language. And number 3, a proposed platting of property when 5 or more lots or sites are proposed. And 4, and that's new. 3 is new. And in the village district for number 4, site plan review shall be in accordance with Article 4, Section D, which already requires a site plan review. So the largest changes are basically tied to, from an applicability standpoint, are tied to the commercial rezonings.
Now, this item, so item number 1, well, are we going to open the public hearing on this, or are we going to?
Sure. I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay with you all.
Sure, that'd be great. I'll go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Does anybody wish to speak to this item, site plan review? Nobody's on the list. Now, speak now, forever hold your peace. In that case, I'll close the public hearing and turn the meeting over to the commissioners to the, I've got a couple of questions. One, so basically, any time that somebody wants to rezone something from B2 to B3 to B4 to M1 or you name it, they would have to come with a site plan review.
That's right. The amendment will have to accompany a site plan.
So if somebody lives out on Highway 181 and they live in a residential house and they want to sell their property and they just feel like as B4, the property would be worth more than R1 or R2 or whatever their current zoning is, they would actually have to have a site plan review. I mean, that would preclude that.
Right. Well, I mean,
So
they could
whoever they sold that to would then do an offer subject to getting a rezoning with the site plan review, which means they'd have to put in, which means basically nobody's going to rezone their land unless they're going to develop it themselves or buy it with the gamble that they'll get it, because nobody's going to put that much money in a whim or
right. Well, and the way it's intended, if you're going to, again, you're going to have a commercial rezoning, and we, at the previous meeting, we've had, there's some concerns expressed because we had a particular rezoning, and it was in an area of town that was close to residential. It was a highly visible area, and there was some concern about what's going to be built there. We could not tell them what's going to be built there. We couldn't tell them where the drive-through would be located. We could not tell them anything, any particulars about the construction of the building, and this is kind of what we felt like would address that. But in your scenario, you're right. An amendment would have to be accompanied by a site plan. That site plan will be binding. There are some minor modifications you can make. It's currently written. There's some minor modifications you can make to a site plan, and there's some amendments you can make to the site plan, and there's an expiration of a site plan.
Then what if the commercial building burns down? I mean, then it's got its whatever zoning, so at that point they can do whatever meets the zoning.
If you had a commercial building that had site plan approval that burned down, I believe that at that time our non-conforming language would kick in. I believe we allow you to build it back within 365 days of the current footprint, if I'm not mistaken. So in that scenario, if you had a site plan approved commercial building that burned, you could build it back exactly like it was, as long as you initiate that process within 360, or start the process.
What I'm saying, but they could build something else at that point, as long as it met the, say it's B2, as long as it met the B2 requirement, they could then do anything that meets the B2 requirement, because at that point they wouldn't be required a site plan if they didn't meet the 30% or something else didn't trigger it. Or if they built the building and just after 3 years decided, heck, this isn't working out, took a bulldozer and bulldozed it, and then built what they want.
Right. I think that's a potential, Mr. Chairman. That could potentially happen.
I'm not saying, obviously it's a lot of money. I'm just throwing out scenarios that, that's.
Now, let me back up, because it's a binding site plan. So it would run with that land. So if it were destroyed and you want to build something else back that did not meet that site plan, I believe you have to come back to get a new site plan approved.
So in that case, why don't we just do away with their zoning requirements and just say any commercial building has to go to site plan review, period, no matter what? Just throw all this out.
Right.
Well, this is just when it changes from residential.
Right. No, this would be any any commercial zoning, any commercial rezoning.
Any rezoning to commercial, basically, which is,
But any rezoning, not just anybody building commercial.
Yeah, any rezoning.
But my
Yeah.
point is this. I mean, we're getting fairly filled up with commercial right now. I mean, we've got the Greeno Road we're looking at, and this would probably cure a lot of what we're concerned about on Greeno Road, frankly. We were talking about this with the greens out there. But my point is, I mean, if this flies and we're just saying, hey, we want to take a next step, we're not just interested in zoning. We're interested in architectural review and how it looks, and we really want to be, really concerned about this stuff. Why not just say any commercial building project has to be subject to site plan review?
Right.
Just be done.
Because
Here, if you've got two pieces of property and, one rezoned in, 2016, and then the next one rezones in 2018, well, this one's basically got deed restrictions attached to it, stating you've got to build this exact building or go through site plan review. Or if you've got the building, next door, you just do whatever meets B4 or B2 or whatever it's zoned.
Under the current scenario, say you have a property that's B4 and you want to rezone it to B2. It's a vacant piece of property. It's vacant. Nothing's on it right now. That rezoning would have to have an accompanying site plan, and that use would also be tied to that site plan. So the zoning would give you the permitted uses you're allowed to put there. The site plan would provide you how you could build, where you could build, so forth, and the use of the property. So as a commission or as a council, you would know when you approve a rezoning with a site plan, you would know the use and where it's going to be located on the property. Right now, it's, you're approving rezonings. They could do a multitude of uses that some are offensive, some aren't. Even in the same zoning category, you've got a variety of uses in there. I think this is a way to provide as much information to the decision makers as possible about what's going to go there, what the use will be, and also to the citizens that are nearby. Because, as always, we hear a lot of concerns when we really can't definitively tell them what's going to go there and what it's going to look like. And in this process, it would provide a lot more certainty of what's going to be done. And I understand your comments, and I think you've got some good points.
No, and I'm not arguing this.
Right.
I just want everybody to know on the front end, and see, to me, these are the meetings that ought to have 120 people in here.
Mm-hmm.
Not the subdivision meetings where everybody hates the subdivision, but it
Right.
meets every regulation. I mean, these are the ones that we ought to be talking for 3.5, 4 hours and vetting and getting,
Right.
Angry about, making sure we understand what we're
Mm-hmm.
really in for. But that's a concern, and another concern is, if somebody's got their land outside of the city limits, this is sure going to, be a detractor of them, with that, Alabama mentality of I want to do what I want to do with my property.
Right.
It's sure going to be a detractor for anybody that ever want to come in the city limits, and most of the, commercial growth that we're going to have is going to be, outside of the city limits.
Sure.
When you look at the future. And that's a bit of a concern, is if we get, the inside of Fairhope too restrictive, we might have like around Boulder or Gainesville, Florida, or
Right.
Boulder, Colorado, we might end up with the halo
Right.
effect. And all of a sudden, from 181 out, it just becomes garbage.
Mm-hmm.
And everything inside is, is too exclusive to afford to build on. And we end up with more residential infill and lose a lot of the commercial component to the downtown if we make it too
Right.
restrictive. The other concern that I have is line 17, number 3, a proposed platting of property when 5 or more lots or sites are proposed. So we're basically saying every subdivision from now on is going to have to go to the city council. Do we know if the city council even wants that?
If it's tied to a rezoning.
Oh,
I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry. You're right. It would be a site plan approval before the city council.
Which basically means any non-minor subdivision is going to the city council from now on. Do we even know if the city council wants that on their agendas when we start
Right.
getting cranked up and have 17
Right.
subdivisions, and we've talked, 3.5 hours on 2 or 3 of them here, and that same angry mob goes to the city
Right.
council. But I'm just asking Jay, do you really want that, and do they want that time?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when, if a subdivision meets the subdivision regs, by law, we have to approve it. By law, they have to approve it. So it seems like just a time for the city. One reason the city council, I think, has us is it buffers them politically. And, when you saw that Cordy apartment, basically one city council person survived the election who voted to support it. And, for good, bad, or indifferent. So, the point is, if you have a subdivision that everybody hates, but it meets all of the subdivision regulations, and you've got 5 elected people, everybody out in that audience is saying, we're going to vote you out, it puts you in a legal, bind that, here's Jay sitting there saying, well, gosh, I kind of like to be reelected, but on the other hand, legally, this thing meets the subdivision regs. So, I just don't, if I were a city council person, I would not want that at all.
Well, but I think, and Lee, I appreciate you looking out for me and possibly getting reelected. But I think the difference would be is that we would have to approve any subdivision that meets the subdivision requirements. But we wouldn't necessarily have to rezone something. The rezoning is where the interpretation and the vote comes in, right?
That's right.
The site plan presentation is even if it does meet the requirements, we wouldn't necessarily have to approve it because there's no requirement to approve rezoning.
That's the whole, I think the thought process behind this section that we're speaking of now is you're exactly right, Councilman. With a subdivision, you have very, very limited parameters. If it meets it, you almost have to approve it unless there's some just very significant public safety issue or something like that. Site plan is tied to zoning, which is a little more, provides a little more flexibility to the council and the planning commission. Maybe you want to see a road tie in a different place or something. You know, these things come up during these site plans. I guess the thought process for this is it gives, before you go to the expense of engineering a subdivision and bringing it for preliminary plat, it gives you the chance to get a site plan approved with a simple site plan, probably low investment from a developer or someone, and get that approved. And then if there's some give and take on that as far as lot sizes or where lots back up to, whatever it may be, we've all seen all these scenarios. It would give you a chance in the very, very early stages of this development, prior to spending a bunch of money on engineering, to just look at a simple site plan and say, okay, we like that site plan, stamp on it, go ahead, go forward with your preliminary plat, spend your money, it's good to go. That's kind of the thought process. Similar to, again, we're trying to focus, and this whole gist of this whole thing is we want to focus more on the planning aspects of the land development, not necessarily get at the early stage, get bogged down into the very, very technical engineering merits. That will come. We've got two fine engineers on our staff who I'm sure will scrutinize any kind of project engineering-wise, and so that's the whole gist, just trying to focus more on planning. I see Richard laughing, I guess. Are you in that category, Richard? Again, trying to focus again on the planning, and you know, this is just a draft. That's why tonight just brought it forward, get comments on. We can certainly change it however the planning commission sees fit. We're not tied to this at all. We'd be glad to change it if there's issues with it.
Yeah, Wayne, and the other thing I'd say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, is something that Lee said that I think is something to consider is just from a logistical standpoint, getting all these in front of the council to be voted on. You know, it takes a lot of time sometimes, and some of these council meetings are already 2 to 3 hours. I just don't know if there's. And
I think that's an absolute concern.
I mean, the council can fire us pretty quickly if they, so desire, replace us, get whomever in here they want to do. They can change the ordinances. They can, they can change the subdivision regs to get whatever they want. And we can't get to the point that we just say, hey, sorry. And the concern that I have is, I was always told by our last legal that basically the site plan reviews of somebody's building, and maybe this is wrong, and Ken can correct me, but that if the site plan met all of the city ordinances and subdivision regs, that we were pretty much required by law to approve it whether we liked it or not. And it looked like with the project Barnhart, was bringing in at one time that we were really going to have that because over across from Greer's, he had a plan that for some reason a lot of people just really did not like, and it was going to come up for a site plan review, but I mean it met setbacks every ordinance there was. When you look at this document, which was the old site plan review, it says, when you look under criteria for approval, I mean, it says compliance with the documents, et cetera, like you expect. But then it comes down to say elevations indicating exterior materials, the location's intensity, height of exterior lights, locations of mechanical equipment, outside storage, where the dumpsters are, compliance with sound planning, principles, overall benefit to the community, etc. And based on those criteria, we could just say, no, we don't want another insurance agency in Fairhope. I think we got enough.
Right.
And according to this ordinance, that would legally hold mustard, but it doesn't meet the smell test to me.
Right. I think our current ordinance says that.
That is the current ordinance. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. But even though our current ordinance said that, our legal advice told us that if it met the subdivision regs and the building ordinances, that we by law had to approve it. So my point is, when we look at changing this, if we make these changes, are we going to be able to get outside of, with Alabama state law, of if it meets all of our subdivision regs and building, codes, are we going to be able to say, I just don't know if we really want, I mean, there's going to be a line there. I mean, obviously, we can say we don't want to drive through right there at a bank with 6 tellers showing the road because that's pretty objective. But on the other hand, if we say, you know, we just don't want another 40-unit little strip, 5,000 square foot building here. You know, those things are just kind of coming on and on. We're just sort of tired of those. You know, we don't want that. Bring us something else back on your property that you just paid $300,000 for. And then they bring something, yeah, I don't know if we like that. It's just, you know, it might make too much sound for downtown. Or really, I don't like the dumpster there. You know, there's a residence behind there, and we don't want the dumpster behind it. We don't want the dumpster in front of it. So, sir, I'm sorry, you can't build on your property because we just really don't want there to be a dumpster there. You know, I'm just questioning before if we're going to. We need to make sure that it's going to float if we're going to put it out there on the water.
I think the current language you read a minute ago speaks to compatibility of uses in neighborhoods or next to other uses. In my opinion, that's sort of the function of the Planning Commission. I mean, it is subjective in some degree, but just about everything is. We provide some site plan requirements and location and setbacks, but I believe that you can exercise some judgment on those issues. We have the parameters already given to us right now in the current ordinance, and I think you can exercise those judgments. And you have some cases where it may be incompatible, even though the use may be allowed or whatever. There may be some things that may be incompatible that it doesn't fit there. You might be too narrow. Who knows? There's various factors that come up, and I think what we were just trying to do again is trying to empower the Planning Commission and the Council to exercise those conditions or criteria to review and make recommendations based off of those. I mean, I think the criteria I think criteria is definitely a good thing. I'd rather have criteria than no criteria and turn things down with no criteria or what have you. So again, I think we're trying to, back to the original comment, I think we're really trying to focus more on the planning aspect of this. And I understand your concerns, and you may be right.
And I like the focus. We need to vet this on the front end.
Right.
And I'll be totally supportive on the back end, but we need to vet it on the front end.
Sure.
But I do very strongly believe that subdivisions don't need to go to the city council. I mean, I think rezonings do. I mean, how many cities in the state do subdivisions go to the city council?
I haven't looked at that. No.
But that's the intended effect. It can't.
Oh, yeah.
When thought of us here.
In support of what you have written with some changes, I think this is good because what we are doing here is we are defending the city of Fairhope. We are setting in place a procedure where we at least are sure that the person who is attempting to do a development has all the information and some other things lined up before we go ahead and make an approval. When I first came on the Planning Commission a year or so ago, we were bringing things before us that had big gaps in information, and I just thought that was completely the wrong way to go. Now, I know that the guy who's outside the city, he's unzoned, he's going to put a Dollar General out there no matter what you do, and that's the county's problem. But that doesn't mean that we have to have the same looseness within the city. We need to protect our core, the property that's been required. Yes, it could be a little bit tedious putting a subdivision in front of the council. I agree there. But I don't think it's tedious that somebody has to come in and meet what's here, which is basically delineating what I have, what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it, and it accords with the law.
Right.
How else are we supposed to know? Well, you can't just be driving around and say, oops, wait a minute, that shouldn't have happened that way.
Let me make a real quick distinction. We keep talking about subdivisions, and what I'm proposing is to require a site plan for a residential subdivision, but not take over that responsibility of preliminary and final plat. All we're saying with this is, and if the city council chose to do this, I mean, they might say we don't have the ability. We've got a long agenda anyway. What I'm only saying is it would be a simple site plan you bring forward to get approved or not. It would not be a subdivision in the sense of the preliminary plat and plating requirements as required by state law.
I have some questions about the simple. I liked the idea of simplifying the site and breaking up into phases, because I deal with a lot of building owners who don't want to get ahead of themselves and have to pay to fully design a building and then find out it doesn't get a site plan review approval. But I'm not sure. I see some language with conceptual engineering, but I also still see full elevations of all the buildings. I mean, when I hear simple site plan, you know, all 4 elevations is a design building. It might not be detailed.
Right, right.
But it may be more fleshed out than the owner needs to be at that point.
And that's why I wanted to just have it discussed tonight, because I've struggled to maintain that balance between having enough specificity but then having it too detailed.
Yeah.
And so any kind of comments like that, I think we would certainly love to hear, especially if someone with an architectural background with yourself who looks at it from a different lens than we do. And I think I would certainly want to get that feedback.
Well,
because what we're trying to, we don't want to get it so specific, but we want, we're trying to create that balance.
Well, and I recognize I'm going the other direction for people asking for more information, but I'd love it if, I guess I wonder if there's more of a performance way to get there, where you're concerned about the window. I mean, what you're concerned about is the window to wall ratio, not is it brick or side, not the design. It's sort of height, impact. Are they looking at a big brick wall or, some more detail? And I don't know, I guess if it were phased, there might be the community input, the simple site plan approval, and then the final, and that may be getting more complicated. But I guess I'm not seeing the simplicity on the architectural side.
And if I could, let me help it kind of explain. I mentioned earlier when we first started, there's another as a companion amendment that will come with this at the next meeting. It's a little less complicated, but what that will say is, and we've discussed this before at various meetings and town hall meetings and so forth, that what we would propose, and you'll see it next month, we would propose a pre-application conference with all the staff that's involved in the development, myself, Public Works, utilities, whomever, will meet with the applicant, kind of go over what the site conditions are, where the utilities are, all those things, kind of hash out what our concerns are. That would then would have to have a community meeting with the neighboring property owners just to get their feedback before you start designing things, so maybe you can kind of counter any issues that may come up, maybe a different location of of a parking space, whatever it may be. And then you would have your application submitted. We would then review that application, and then staff would hold a development review committee meeting and invite the applicant there to that meeting to get the feedback after we have reviewed the application. And so what we're saying, it'll have plenty of discussions back and forth with the applicant before it actually gets to a site plan process, or a submittal before it gets before the planning commission or the city council.
Well,
that's kind of what we're looking at.
And I appreciated the minor modifications. I appreciated one that I guess residential isn't required to do that. So if you're doing a major subdivision, you don't have to show 4 elevations of every building in the subdivision. That seems, but then why do we for commercial? But I guess if there is some, allowance for they might get a new tenant. That tenant, a developer may be doing this, and the new tenant may be interested in the building, and they might want windows in a different place or a different roof pitch, or if there's some allowance that those things can change, it's still meeting the ordinance.
Okay.
That helps a
and
little
again,
bit.
that helps us kind of go back and tailor this in a way that will fit what the needs are out there, at the same time giving some, some certainty
to neighbors and.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
We had a rezoning application across from the rec center. And they have a site plan that shows buffers, and they showed parking, and they showed elevations. What distinguishes what we did then versus what you're talking about now?
That was a PUD, a planned unit development, and the planned unit development allows you some flexibility, the setbacks and those kind of things, but it also requires a site plan. But
was the use designated? The use was designated on that site plan too, was it not?
It was. But then you'd be saying everybody would have to go back and get a PUD to do something.
Well, not the specific use, the percentage of use. So
Yeah.
what percentage would be retail, what percentage would be business, what percentage would be residential. It wasn't like, we'll have Starbucks here, and this is going to be a clothing store, and this is going to be a bank.
But how committed to that site plan are we with the PUD versus the site plan we'd approve for any zone that they would have to come in with?
I think the distinction between a PUD and a site plan review, a PUD, you can ask for, if you get a PUD approved, you can vary the setbacks. You can vary the height. You can, it's basically hate to say a waiver from the ordinance, but it is to some degree. You can waive any requirement of the ordinance in that PUD if you get approved, but it has to be based on creative design and all those kind of things. You want to see, PUDs are usually allow you a lot more flexibility from the design standpoint, a lot more creativity, in the hopes of getting a better quality project than what would normally be produced from just a typical, project. With a site plan, you cannot deviate from the setbacks or any of the requirements at all.
Yeah, no, but with a PUD though, you can't deviate from the site plan that was proposed in the request, can you?
You can't. There are some slight modifications that can be made, very, very slight modifications, but once that PUD site plan is approved, that's going to govern for the most part. There are some slight modifications that can be done, but those are in very limited circumstances.
I'm just wondering if we should insert the same types of slight modifications in what we're talking about here.
We have in here, there are some modifications in here that we discussed, some criteria for modifications.
So really, we're just asking for the same information on every zone piece of property that we would ask for a PUD. Yeah.
Yes, to some degree. Yeah, I think that'd be fairly accurate. It's not exactly like the PUD, but we're asking for similar information.
Does the PUD have to show elevations of all the buildings? If they're
Yes, I think on that one we had on Green Road did. The PUD ordinance is about a page long, about 3. I mean, it's not real detailed, but I think that's been the common practice with Fairhope, is to require that information on the PUD.
And that, I mean, obviously that's an area of interest of mine, but so not to focus on it too much, but also thinking about just how subjective it is to review elevations. And there's certain things in the zoning that you're reviewing for height, and we have some requirements for materials, but there's really no other criteria by which to judge the elevations.
Right.
So it gets kind of wishy-washy where we just say, I like the look of that building, or I don't like the look of this one.
And now in drafting this, when we were talking about elevations, the intent was not to evaluate it based on architectural merits. We were going to look at the height and eaves and lights and those things like that. I mean, it wasn't intended to, to judge it based on architectural standards at all.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of an owner-developer perspective, if they were instead just submitted the building will be no more than this height, the eaves, it will have a pitched roof, we'll have about this much window to wall area, and here are the proposed materials. I'm talking against my own business interests here, but they wouldn't have to hire an architect to get that far down the road until they knew that that's really where they wanted to go.
Well, let's cut to the chase. I mean, let's look at the Colonial Inn building. I voted for that, and it's not at all what it was supposed to be. I mean, where's the wood that was supposed to be out there? Where's the big, nice 12-foot porch that's supposed to be out there? I mean, they brought that to us under a site plan review. We approved it, the supposed new Colonial Inn, but I mean, they brought it to us under a site plan review, and we approved it, and what's there is not, the glossy pictures they showed us, nor that they showed the Board of Adjustments.
Right.
And you look at this with another reason I think with the subdivision regs, Jim Reed taught the Planning and Zoning Commission a lesson twice when we denied subdivisions based on the comprehensive plan. And he sent it back to us saying by law we had to approve it or be in contempt of the court. One was out there on that land on Red Barn Road, and one was out there off of Thompson Hall Road. And we, by a judge's order, had to sign approvals of 2 subdivisions. So my point is, these engineers come with us with a subdivision they know meets the approval, and I mean they don't give a darn, if that's what their client wants, and they bring it to for all of this vetting, and we take it to the city council, and there are 100 people out there that say we hate it. City council denies it. Well, they just come in with the application anyway. And then at that point, a judge is going to tell us that by law we have to approve it. So my point is simply, I like the spirit of this, but I'm just saying I don't see where subdivisions need to go to the city council.
Well, I guess the distinction I would draw, I don't know the case that you're talking about with Judge Reed. I think the distinction I would make is, I'm not positive, but I would bet that was based off of the subdivision regulations in the comprehensive plan. This
subdivision regulations will be denied based on the comprehensive plan.
Right, but through the sub-reg process.
And he said that the comprehensive plan in the state of Alabama is not a legally governing ordinance. Therefore, the subdivision regs was all that we could look at.
But I think what what I'm trying to do is tie the site plan, not the subdivision, not the plating or anything else, tying the site plan to the zoning ordinance. I think the zoning ordinance provides you a lot more, I think it provides you a lot more flexibility in reviewing these things, and that's the whole intent here. So in theory, you would get a site plan approved, you'd bring it back next month with the preliminary plat and a final plat. That's the whole, but we're not, again, I want to make sure we make that distinction. This is not a subdivision per state statute on plating. This is a subdivision, a site plan approval based off the zoning ordinance and the zoning authority given to us by the state of Alabama.
Right, and I think, you know, I don't know that this is going to send anything to the city council, if I'm understanding right. I don't think it would send anything to the city council they wouldn't see already, because we already see all the rezonings. And so we would just be getting a rezoning with a site plan of what they expected it to be. We wouldn't be voting on whether that was, that particular site plan and subdivision met all the regulations and requirements. It would just give us a better idea, or whatever council's in place at the time, a better idea of what they were actually going to be rezoning it for. It would prevent sort of.
You're going to be looking at every single subdivision.
Right, but
Every single one you're going to look
but
at.
only the ones that come that have to be rezoned, right?
Let me clarify that.
No, every subdivision you're looking at.
Jay, let me clarify what I wrote. Let me clarify what I wrote. The intent was it's tied to the rezonings. Where it's placed, where I wrote it here, it implies it's everyone. The intent is it only applies to rezonings. That's my intent.
Yeah.
If it's confusing,
Okay.
my apologies.
Yes.
It's my apologies, because and I hear what you're saying now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
and
it's just
it's
for
written that way,
rezonings.
Lisa. That's my fault. I
Okay,
apologize
no, I
for
have
that.
no problem with that.
That's
Yeah.
a big
And,
difference.
and even those, we wouldn't be voting on the validity of the subdivision itself. We would just we would have a better idea of what they were going to build on that rezoned
Right,
property.
right. My fault. I'm sorry. I should have clarified that. But yeah, the intent is it's tied to the rezoning for the site plan for residential. I'm sorry.
And if you are in an existing zoning district and you don't require a change in zoning to do
Then you go forward and do the normal
development,
process.
you just straight up and down.
Right, that's
So
right.
it's not everything that's going to be.
Right. And that's my fault, because the way it's written, I'm reading it now, and I can see it wasn't clear. And when we bring it back, we'll make sure that correction is in
Well,
there.
then that begs this question. That clears up a lot. Then let's think most of the land that's going to be developed is going to be unzoned. So they're going to want to zone it R1 to get the utility tap fees and all that reasonable. So is that going to then trigger this? And if so, would that possibly make people want to build their subdivision out of the city limits and then come for rezoning after they build the subdivision? In which case, it may have a negative effect.
Right. And that's a concern we discussed at the staff level. Where it's currently written, if you're getting it rezoned, and when you have as my understanding, you have two ways when you annex property. One, you can annex it and it comes in automatically as R1. The other is you can annex it based on a particular zoning category. Which, if it's that case, if it's R1, it doesn't come to the Planning Commission, just goes straight to the City Council, they approve it, it comes in as R1. If you're asking for a zoning change as part of your annexation, it has to come before you. I think we had one a couple months ago, I believe. So, in that case, if you're annexing in and you want B1, whatever it is, then you would have to come through this process, and with that B1 annexation, you would have to have a site plan with it.
I think we might want to address anything that automatically comes in under R1 would not have to go through that process.
Yeah. But as it stands right now, if you annex in, it automatically goes to R1, and the Planning Commission doesn't see it. Again, if it's something else, you're asking for something else, it comes to this process first.
Okay.
Wayne, is there a sunset clause on a site plan?
It is, and it's under expirations, which is on page, let me find the page.
That's really important.
I saw that it's like a 1 year.
Yes.
Is it
it's-
now
it's
18 months?
On page 6G. Should be, here's what it says. It says, a development permit shall be valid for a period of 1 year from the date of approval. If the final site plan development is not submitted within 1 year, the site plan shall be considered expired and invalid. A site plan may be extended by city council on a case-by-case basis. A request for written request for extension, I have to fix that, providing the circumstances causing the project delay and a projected start date must be submitted prior to the site plan expiration. A site plan extension is valid for a period of 1 year, and an expired site plan is not eligible for an extension.
Well,
So-
let me ask you this question. if you get a rezoning that goes along with that site plan, and the site plan expires, what happens to the zoning? Zoning stays?
What, it would revert back, and again, it would, that's really a question I think I would want to ask tonight. You can do it a couple of ways. You can have it revert back to the original zoning, or in the case if it's an annexation, you would go back to the R1, I guess. Or it could expire, keep the zoning, but then require a site plan to develop once you decide to develop it.
That would make more sense than having a reversion back to a previous zoning classification.
I want to make sure that we have that real precise and clear. That would have probably alleviated a lot of problems that we've had just recently with 10 years down the road, things developing, and a lot can happen in a year, with. Sure. So that's, I'm glad to see that.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate all your comments, and that's what we really intended tonight to be. Try to get as much comment as we can, so when we bring it back next month, we can kind of tweak it a little bit. Again, I want to emphasize, we're really just trying to really focus more on the planning aspect of things, and that's the whole intent. And again, if you have comments after the meeting, you want to call me, come by, let me know. I'd be glad to sit down and kind of go over it. This was just the first shot at this. There may be a lot of things that may need adjusting, and we're absolutely fine doing that. Just want to sit down and try to get as much comments and get it as prepared as possible before moving on. So I appreciate everybody's
just another thing to kind of revert back what we were talking about. We can, as the Planning Commission, we can always have an opinion about what we think by just being a citizen in the community based on feedback from the community. But if it checks all the boxes, then we have to pass it regardless if it, makes sense for Fairhope. Because sometimes I wonder, like, why are we here if it's got to go through anyway? We just have to say.
The first answer to the question why you're here is you're the legally designated set of eyes to make sure it checks all the boxes.
Correct.
And yes, there is some case law that says if a subdivision meets all the objective criteria set forth in your subdivision regulations, and there aren't very many subjective ones. One time I went through the regulations and identified each one that had some subjectivity to it. If it meets all the objective and doesn't involve any subjective determinations, then you pretty much have to approve it. And there are only a limited number of cases where there is subjectivity. But for example, where you would give a waiver under the LID provisions. There are a few like that.
But Ken, if I could, let me make sure we're clear on this. This is not an amendment to the subdivision regulations. This is an amendment to the zoning ordinance. So we're exercising our zoning authority for this, not our subdivision authority. Make sure that that's clear. I hope we haven't confused it tonight, but this is absolutely only for the zoning ordinance, and we are exercising our zoning authority for this, not subdivision. We aren't. That's not something we want. That this is purely on our authority under the zoning ordinance. It would only apply inside the corporate limits.
And just one other thing, Holly, there have been cases certainly that have occurred where you can check all the boxes, but there's still extenuating circumstances that deal with the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Sure.
In the county, we had one that went all the way to the Supreme Court. Ultimately overturned the appellate court and the lower court because it was done the way it should have been done. And it was a subjective decision by the Planning Commission, but it had to do with the health, safety, and welfare of the public, or in some certain instances, the environment, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I look at it sometimes the wrong place, wrong time. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be there. And it's not that I'm against what developers should do. I just look at it from a standpoint of a citizen, but we need to be prepared from the effects of what we're dealing with.
Mr. Chairman, I think from the site plan, there are criteria tied to this, and I guess what our intent is that I think we trust the Planning Commission to exercise their judgment on these things, to apply the criteria, and to make good decisions on these. And if a site plan needs to be tweaked somewhere along the line to maybe mitigate an objection, I think the whole intent is that's why we're not doing a full-blown engineered plan. because those are difficult to change and it costs money to change. Changing a site plan is a little easier than, so that's kind of again, the whole intent. And I think that, we believe the Planning Commission has that ability and can exercise their judgment in a very useful and proper way to get better quality development than you would otherwise.
I think it's a great idea, and I think it really addresses Bruno Road very well. It's something that is exciting to me about it. I think we've got to look at it real carefully to make sure that legally everything will, pass mustard. But I think, with a lot of the issues that we've had that Holly's gotten frustrated about, it's a great idea. And of course, and another reason you're here is to make suggestions for changes to the subdivision regulations. When we see things over and over that, or issues like what we're doing tonight with the accessory dwellings is, to make those changes. But that's some good ideas that y'all have there. Appreciate you doing all that work on that.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with the Planning Commission, we'll put it on next month's agenda we'll make these tweaks. And again, if we're not there yet next month, we want to make sure we get it right. We don't want to be too expedient to where we don't get a good document. So again, we want to get it right.
I think it's a great idea.
Thank you for your work on this.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. That's a lot of creative work, too. Next item on the agenda is request of Sawgrass Consulting LLC for a final plat approval of Pinewood subdivision, a 7-lot subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The property size is approximately 9.7 acres. There's 7 lots. 6 of those lots front on Manley Road. The smallest lot is 17,570 square feet. There were only 3 conditions of approval. One had to do with a 10-foot right-of-way dedication to that recently went through City Council, so that condition can be removed. And that's pretty much it.
Okay. And
I have a question about it.
is this is not a public hearing, is it?
It's fine.
Oh, it is? Okay.
You want to open it up to
We'll
the
do a
public?
hearing, then we'll go ahead. All right, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing at this time. Does anybody wish to speak to this item?
Mr. Chairman, Tom Gregory, Sawgrass, I'm here. If you have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. So the developer is here if you have any questions for him or the staff. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing now. Holly, what questions do you have?
I don't know if it's for Tom or for Nancy, but lot number 7, I know we talked about it. What is the plan for lot number 7?
The developer is looking at continuing on subdivision.
So like a phase 2 or, okay. Was that in the preliminary plat?
No, I raised that question about that being a phased development, but at that time they told me there was no.
No second phase, because I remember this lot 7, I was
And it
concerned
was a
about who
remnant
was going to
parcel.
maintain it, what was going to go with it. So now it is a phase 2, but that was,
Nothing's been done yet. This is
Nancy, there's a question in there they wrote up to you. Confirmation from Dewberry Pebble Reefs that the soccer drainage can accommodate the additional stormwater.
That was
Have you
done
ever gotten that
yes, that
confirmation?
was done in the very early stages, and they said that was approved, so as far as it could accommodate the small amount of drainage. There's that grass swale right behind there. I'm not a drainage expert, but that's.
Former soccer coach, I don't want to see the little boys thrown away.
I've got Tom, I've got an issue with lot 7 too, and it goes way back, as you well know, in all of the time that you spent with the county. It had to do with many years ago, the developers out in the county, and this is certainly here in Fairhope, but the modus operandi was that they would develop all of the lots along the highways and leave a remnant parcel stuck in the inside. And what in essence it ended up with was a big train wreck, a big mess. And I think we pretty well got away from that over the years, and we did not allow that to happen any longer. You had to have a game plan to let us see just exactly what the issue was. Now, I guess this is a final plat, so I mean you've already been up the road with this in the past. But Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get maybe get Wayne and staff to work on this a little bit, because it has the potential of really developing into a mess, and especially when you line all of your lots up along the highway, and everybody wants their own driveway. It just doesn't work. I mean, yeah, Mosley Road's not going to be that bad right now, but in the future it will be, and it's going to create even more congestion, and it's going to create an issue with traffic. Lining them up like that. You know, ideally, if it was, I wish I would have been here when you came to preliminary plat, but I wasn't. But it would have been, you know, ideally, those lots wouldn't face the highway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you'd work them all off the inside.
And they do, in all fairness, they resemble what is on Manly already.
I understand. I understand.
They're large.
But they're all facing out, and everybody's got a driveway.
Which is what the subdivision regs call for. The subdivision regs were trying to make Manly Road look like a residential street, not a thoroughfare. So it may be a poor plan, but if you notice, you know, the subdivision regs may be something that you want to talk to Art about tweaking, because if they face the other way, it would go against the subdivision regs because it would be a double-sided lot. So that's something that, if you've got some concerns about, you probably want to talk to Art about making.
You mean Wayne?
The other day.
You're Art.
Yeah, I'll talk to myself.
It's been a long day. Talk to yourself about it. Just move on.
Heck of a conversation. You ought to get on that.
Talk to Wayne about it. Oh, excuse me. Talk to Mr. Dias. Please talk to Mr. Dias about it, because there are some subdivision regs that, if you did it the way you're talking about, would preclude the subdivision because of a double-sided lot. So that might be something we need to tweak.
I understand, but I mean, and there are a number of there are many subdivisions in the county that do exactly what I'm referring to.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't face the street. That's their backyards.
Right.
But it's and if it's an issue associated with subdivision reg, anyway, I'd appreciate it if you.
Well, and the one thing, Wayne, we talked about that phased development, and we were going to look at some definitions for that as well, which may help. So.
Right. Thank you.
Art, like I think of an example you're probably thinking of as a neighborhood that comes to mind is Chamberlain Trace on 64, where they've got the beautiful crepe myrtles that line the road, and they've got fenced yards that the houses aren't road frontage. I understand. As far as Lot 7, who's going to maintain this lot until it develops or not develops, or?
The current owner will retain ownership of it.
So they'll maintain the okay. Is there a deadline on when this has to be developed, or just infinity Lot 7's there?
I'm not aware of any deadline. I don't think our ordinance provides any kind of deadline or date you have to have it platted or anything like that.
Okay.
Any further questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Final plat, I move that the final plat for Pinewood subdivision be approved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. All right, that item passes unanimously. Final item on the agenda, public hearing to consider a request of Dewberry Preble Rish for plat approval of Montrose Preserve Phase 1, a 3-lot minor subdivision.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is, the name has been changed to the Main Street at Montrose. That's the new project name. Again, 3-lot subdivision. This was part of the Montrose Preserve PUD, as you may recall, that was came to the Planning Commission several months ago. It meets those PUD requirements. The lots are in conformance with the PUD. Buford reviewed this application. I think there's only one outstanding comment with the fire flows, and Mr. Pumphrey will be addressing those. All the other comments have been addressed. That's in your packet. And staff recommends approval.
Mr. Chairman, would you explain to those of us that weren't here for the, you said it was a PUD?
Mm-hmm.
Would you explain what went on with that?
I was only here through the end of it, so I can't tell you all of it because it happened before my time here.
How about you, Lee?
Mr. Chasen's here. I mean, he could probably provide you the.
He may have a. Do you have any slides showing the original PUD?
Yeah.
I can tell you this: they did a lot of compromise, and they originally came up. Mr. Chasen came in with the proposal, and The neighbors up there in Montrose went absolutely crazy, and they worked with the neighbors a lot up there and made a residential development across the street, basically from the Rock Creek entrance, that the neighbors in Montrose actually liked, which if they're pretty picky up there. If they like it, it must be pretty nice. But basically trying to preserve the oak trees on the backside, all of the streets with the PUD, we gave up some of the connectivity, because had the connectivity occurred, the county streets would have had to have been taken up to current code, and all the oak trees would have been wiped out. So basically they tried to preserve as much as they could the elevations of the land back there, the topographical types of aspects, as well as protect the oaks and keep the entrances going off of Highway 98 rather than winding through Montrose. But that was the biggest issue of it in the Montrose community.
Is this plat that's provided here, is this the extent of the PUD?
No.
It's a much larger PUD.
This is just a part.
It's just one small part.
Right. And I was here for the very last meeting. I know there was a lot of back and forth with the community, and Mr. Chasen worked closely with them to address most of their concerns. I think he went back and forth numerous times with them. I believe the resulting PUD that was approved by the Planning Commission and City Council was a good plan. I think it mitigated most of the concerns that were expressed, and Lee mentioned some of the connectivity standards. It would have been very, very difficult to implement those because of county right-of-ways, and those are usually just meandering paths right now in Montrose. And so I think the plan that was approved was a good plan, and this simple minor subdivision is in conformance with that larger PUD.
I had a question about the remnant parcel. I wasn't part of the original PUD, but appreciated that they were leaving that and absorbing stormwater naturally rather than clearing it to make a detention pond. But I was wondering, I'm looking at future development of Montrose Preserve subdivision is how they're labeling it.
Yeah, again, this is part of a larger PUD. This is just the first phase of this PUD. There are more lots that will be forthcoming in future phases.
So what assurance do we have? I mean, my concerns were if the drainage is being handled just by sheet flow over undeveloped land, what assurance do we have that there's not going to end up being concentrated flow that might cause erosion, and that land will be protected to continue to absorb the stormwater?
Sure.
We'll get the developer up here in just a moment.
Yeah. Now, but just to make sure everybody understands, right now we have a consulting engineer that reviews all our stormwater regulations. Every subdivision has a review from a professional engineer who reviews those very, very carefully to meet our current standards. Fortunately, we have Richard Peterson, PE, who has been looking at these, helping us as well. Also, at the end of the meeting, I'd like to introduce our newer staff member. He'll also be involved with that as well. So it will be getting a thorough review from the engineering perspective.
Any future subdivision?
Absolutely. And as we go forward, any phase that comes in will have to be in compliance with that site plan of the PUD. That's the mechanism where we make sure that it meets it's done as it was originally approved. And so every time you see a phase, it will be reviewed for compliance with that PUD.
Well, I guess that was part of my question, though, is lot 1, 2, 3 and remnant parcel, is the remnant parcel being wild? Is that part of this? Is that part of the site plan that we're reviewing, or is that future development?
I can only speak to the minor application of the 3 lots. As far as what the future plans are, and Steve May could come up and answer those questions. I know there was some retention areas in this vicinity. Again, I wasn't with the project from the very beginning, so I don't recall the details of that. But if Mr. Chairman,
let's call Steve up here and let him make his presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, Steve Pumphrey with Dewberry. See what I can do to help with some of this. And I guess the most unfortunate part is about half of you probably haven't seen the master plan, so you're kind of at a disadvantage. So I understand that. I wished I had thought about it. I could have brought a master plan that showed this. Really, the only reason you're seeing these 3 lots tonight is because these 3 lots are somewhat segregated from the rest of the development because of a major draw. That slanted line you see there runs along a major drainage area. So
Okay.
that divided these 3 lots from the rest of the development. And they fronted an existing roadway and have existing utilities. So it was just a natural thing to bring in these 3 lots. Everything we do from now on with the rest of the development will require streets to be designed, drainage, utilities, because all the rest of the lots in the development are going to front a proposed roadway. And so anything we do as far as the rest of the PUD goes will require engineering plans, which then Richard will get involved with the rest of the city staff, and it'll be a whole different review. Again, this one just didn't require any, it doesn't require any drainage. Our engineer looked at it and wrote reports on drainage and traffic, and so this one was fairly simple just to start off with and get these recorded, and then, like I said, then from the rest of it, we'll be coming off Highway 98, comes all the way through the development in phases, and it'll be handled entirely different.
What is the, Steve, what is the PUD primarily residential?
Yes, it is.
Is it all residential?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, I wished we'd had a plan, but bottom line, there were existing roadways around this that were unopened, and the neighborhood didn't want them open, so we developed our own interior road, put a lot of buffers against the adjacent properties, and everything's turned in on our property. So, you know, it took a while, but Mr. Chasen's here. He spent a lot of hours working with the neighborhood to get the plan to suit the neighborhood. And
On the master plan, there was also a conservation easement for a portion. Is that
Yeah.
still in place?
That's still there. We haven't changed anything that you previously saw, and you're right. There was a large wetland area, and even beyond the wetland area, there was some more property that was kind of topographically challenging to develop, so we just put all that in the conservation easement. And it just,
Who's holding the easement?
nothing's been done at this point with it, right, Larry? Once we
Okay.
get to that point of developing from the highway coming in, then we'll deal with it then, and you'll see it before it's obviously recorded.
So I think my questions were just because I didn't understand in the description of the
understand
stormwater, it said leaving the rear of the lot natural. I was looking at that future development. You mean the rear of 1, 2, and 3 is a steep slope
Yes.
and part of a natural drainage?
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, and that will be protected in the conservation easement, the rear of those lots?
Well, it's not, that conservation easement is not here. That's another portion of the PUD.
Okay. So what, and I mean, this all sounds good, but what assurance or what mechanism is there if the rear of lots 1, 2, and 3 being kept natural is what is being used to absorb their stormwater? How do we ensure that they are not kept natural in the future, that somebody doesn't pave them and put in a swimming pool or something
Well,
like that?
we're not even proposing anything to be developed on the rear of those lots in the future. I mean, no, not even detention ponds. We're actually collecting it elsewhere. So those rear of those lots won't be touched, even in the future. And nothing else will be discharged there beyond what's going through there now.
Okay, I guess this is the problem with residential lots in general, is that if, you know, you don't have much, somebody could decide to pave the back of their lot, and then
Well,
that
that
would
would be
change the
done
stormwater modeling, right?
Yeah, in this case, they're not building any streets, roads, doing any improvements. So since it's fewer than 4 lots, it's coming in under a minor subdivision, so it doesn't
don't.
require
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah, so
Right.
there's nothing we can do.
Does that drainage run into Rock Creek?
No,
No.
I don't believe it does it, Larry? No, it doesn't go
Yeah,
to
it
Fly
does.
Creek. It goes to Rock Creek.
It goes
Yeah,
to Rock Creek.
It does go to Rock Creek, not Fly Creek.
Yeah,
Right,
ultimately, everything
Yeah.
up there goes to Rock Creek.
Yeah.
Any further questions for the developer? If not, I'll open the public hearing at this time. Emily, did anybody sign up for this? I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to this item? If not, I'll close the public hearing and turn the meeting back over to the commissioners. Any further questions for the developer? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to tell Larry that he did a fantastic job, you know, working with the homeowners. I know that they've been really happy, and that was a good collaboration. I wish others would learn from that. That was handled excellently.
I agree. We'll follow that with a motion?
I'll
or-
make a motion to accept the final, staff recommendations.
I've got a motion to accept the staff recommendation. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion?
I just want to ask one, but how do you decide when too many residential driveways are on? Is there a speed limit issue? And I see a lot of elevation change. Is there a hill that people are going to be coming over and seeing people back out of the driveway, or?
Richard, that's a great question, and if I could, I'll answer that in a minute if I could. That's something that we've been discussing today, as a matter of fact, about some of the driveways and looking for some sort of standards for that. I think currently, I don't think we have anything on the books currently that would address that.
Anything else? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously. All right, old/new business bylaws discussion.
Mr. Chairman, can I, real quick, can I introduce another staff member real quick, if you don't mind, before we get to that?
Certainly.
I want to introduce everybody to Richard Johnson. Today is Richard's first day. He's the new Public Works Director. Richard comes to us from Daphne. He was the Public Works Director there. Also worked for the county for a number of years, and I want to introduce him. Richard, you want to say anything?
Just honored to be here, and I'll tell you, it's the first time I've ever seen Mr. Jason on that side of the aisle, so kind of the whole world has turned upside down, so, but I'm glad to be here, and I'll just really tell you a little bit of my background. I am a civil engineer, and for the last...
Richard, you want to come to the podium so we can get you for the record?
For the last 11 years, I've been working in the public sector, heavily involved in planning commission activity as far as reviewing for compliance of engineering design standards and things of that nature. I will tell you that my strong suit is drainage, and in living in an area that annually gets more than 60 inches of rainfall, drainage is a very, very big thing. I am probably know enough to be dangerous as a transportation or traffic engineer, and have a lot of insight. And then I have also been involved in the public works sector for that. So what happens here eventually affects public works down the line. So if we get it right at this level, we get a long service life and a lot of good results. And you know, I will tell you, probably the things that I'm proudest of is helping these types of commissions develop good ordinances, good design standards that deliver what is needed as far as performance concerning drainage and transportation. Mr. Peterson is going to be doing that from the utility side of standpoints, and we start solving those problems or not creating new problems due to new developments, then we can spend more time addressing the sins of our past and the failing infrastructures that are remaining out there to be addressed. So I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to getting to know most of you. Some of you I know from years back, and just glad to be here, and we'll hopefully be able to start laying out and having a lot of these questions that you have concerns about answered in detail, and earn your confidence that we have done our due diligence, so that when it gets to you, the technical has been worked out to the nth degree and is compliant, and hopefully not only meets our standards but exceeds those standards.
About half the concerns we hear expressed in every meeting are people who come in and say, we just got wet again. That development is draining on us. And the developer says, it's not me, it's somebody else, or there's some other reason that you're getting wet. Anything you can do to help us develop some policies so that we at least know how to respond appropriately to people, because you can't deny the fellow came in, obviously he's wet, he wouldn't be here otherwise. But how are we supposed to respond to that? See, that's the difficulty we have.
Well, and I'll tell you, in my past assignment, a couple of things that we accomplished. One, we adopted a new set of standards in 2011, and I can tell you that every development built that was compliant with those standards since then has not contributed to the problem. The other thing, and it was not cheap, we went through and designed a geisha model for all of our watersheds, and have actually then in-house been able to take the outflow hydrographs designed by the proposed development, what they say that based on their design, what they're going to discharge for every storm event, and then be able to incorporate it in that model and actually verify through sound engineering and scientific practices to show that there is no increased impact to the downstream receiving channels and properties and things like that. And sometimes it shows that there are, and then we can work with that design engineer to change things on that site. And sometimes it's a change to their advantage, because the model may suggest We don't want to detain this water as much. We want to get rid of it faster because we already have a peak issue down here, and if we can get your water on down to the receiving body faster, instead of delaying that peak and joining other peak flows from other developed areas. So it's a wonderful tool. Now, are we there in Fairhope yet? No, but is that a long-term goal? To be able to think of a drainage model as a living document, much like a comprehensive plan. You're taking a proposed development and say, how does it fit in the comprehensive plan? Well, if we have a comprehensive drainage plan and model, we can stand before you and say this development, if it's designed for this standard, fits and works and does not cause harm downstream.
We can't, I live next to the Atlantic Gully, and they've had trouble with it. They had a couple of houses they had to buy people out of and so forth. And about 3 years ago, when they had a 15-inch rain or something overnight.
April 29th, 2014,
one
yes.
of the things I remember, an engineer and I went to the council and we said, what you need to do is to have a flow analysis of this water. Where is it coming from? Where is it going? Because all they were suggesting was putting in a project here and a project here. And all that was going to do, without knowing the impact, was send the water to somebody else's house. So I'm hearing about a drainage plan, and a master drainage plan would make a lot of sense because it would enable us to respond appropriately. All we can really do is tell them, well, put the retention pond here and make the wall a little higher. But you've got water on top of water. You've got the water's only about 10 inches below the bottom of the retention pond. So that's not going to really work all that well.
Well, one of the challenges in public works, even engineers that try to do a good job, a lot of times we don't fix a drainage problem, we move it. Meaning that there is a localized impact. Somebody is saying, I am getting water that is causing me harm. And so you go and fix that problem, and then lo and behold, it turns out that you weren't holistic in your approach, and all you've done is move it further down the channel, and someone else is getting a negative impact. That's why you've got to look at the whole watershed holistically and ask yourself and especially if we have proposed developments, sometimes you can work with that development and incorporate features in it that actually solve problems elsewhere. And sometimes that can be done at minimal cost or no cost to that developer above and beyond what would normally be required.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to take up much time, but I do want to, I came here for something else, but I did work with Mr. Johnson for 5 or 6 years in Daphne. I hated to see him go, but Daphne's loss is Fairhope's gain. He is a very, very good problem solver and a very good communicator, and y'all have done a great job. I know that Wayne and Art have both worked with Mr. Johnson, so I'm not telling them anything they don't already know. But you really got a great guy here, and he'll take care of y'all.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Wayne, do we have?
That's all we have, Mr. Chairman.
Anything about the bylaws?
I think yep, that'd be me. One of the things that I wanted to briefly discuss tonight, and I know it's nothing that we can take that we can move on, but it has to do with outside communication with applicants or those that are opposed to a given application that we're going to hear. Most of it has to do with transparency. The one thing that I think is most important, especially for a planning commission, is for there to be no question whatsoever in the public's mind and the public's eye of whether or not we're dealing behind the scenes, having communications with an applicant, or being influenced by those that are opposed, for example, to an application. As I'm sure you all know, these are not issues where it's a popularity contest. It doesn't matter whether there's 150 or 200 people come in here pounding their shoes on the table against or in favor of a proposal. It's whether that proposal actually fits the rules and regulations of the city of Fairhope in this case. Now, one of the things that I found very quickly after being appointed here, and it's only my third meeting, but before the very first meeting, I had people calling me about issues, and I think that is I think it's real inappropriate. And what I would propose is that we have a policy, Mr. Chairman, whereby we have a disclosure before every agenda item where we have a public hearing, where if you have been, there's to be instances where you can't get away from it, you know, but that we need to disclose whether or not we've had prior communication to anyone associated with an application. And I think what it does is it assures the public that we're doing our job, we're doing it fairly, and everything that we're going to be hearing is right here in front of them if they so choose to be a part of our hearing process. And I just think it's a good way that we cover ourselves. And what you got, I asked Wayne, Wayne and I talked about it some time ago, and the piece of information that you got when you got here tonight is a suggestion that, not a suggestion, but a recommendation that was put together by staff as it relates to outside communications. We did have these, and they work very, very well at the county level. Mm-hmm. We had a policy, and it certainly worked well, and it protected us in instances where people called our hand. There was no question about it. Mm-hmm. Ralph?
I would agree 100%. Not only that, Wayne, you and I are both AICP. We both have a planning credential. And you know that one of the things that is said is that the planning commissioners, when they go to planning commissioner workshops, you must do just what he said. You must be open about conversations and other things they have before the meeting, because otherwise the rest of the planning commissioners don't know where you're coming from when you're voting, and that's not fair.
Right.
So I agree 100% with
That's
what
right.
you said.
And this is something that when Art called me about this, you know, we had done this at the county. I thought it worked very well, and also they were getting inundated with calls and you know and those kind of things. And I think the benefit is, you know, everything happens right here. You know, that's the whole gist of it. Everything happens right here. If it doesn't, then you just say, you know, and I think it causes people to have a, you know, not to question things, you know, when you have things like this, and we all know how it goes. I saw so-and-so out and whatever, you know. I think with this, it kind of, I think, provides you a level of protection and also a commitment to try to be as open and transparent as you can.
And certainly to shut it down. I mean, when you get a phone call, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about this.
Yeah.
The policy of it's in our bylaws of the planning commission that we can't have prior discussions as it relates to it's a great out. And
again, there may be circumstances where that does happen. You can't help it. You're in a grocery store. You know how it goes sometimes. And if you look at the last paragraph of the proposal, it does discuss that, where you just say, hey, before the item's heard, hey, I had this discussion. This is who I talked to, and you just disclose it, and that's the end of story. And that's kind of the gist of it. Kind of pattern after a county amendment we did to our bylaws, probably 2004 or 5, I guess, Art, something like that, wasn't it?
I asked Ken about this, and Ken, if you would tell us now. We need to publicize this, right? Sure. I mean, that's if y'all are in agreement with it. I mean, that's the whole thing. It
just needs to be put in the form of a resolution, and that it as an amendment to the bylaws, and then that resolution needs to be part of a public notice that goes out for the meeting you want to come up at.
He said it needs to be brought in the form of a resolution and advertised.
Yes.
How does that affect working with them from a utility perspective and trying to, you know, provide the standards that we would otherwise impose on their development?
That's a great question for Richard, because Richard will be, when we have our pre-application meetings and so forth, he will be involved with that. I think in that case, Richard, I'd probably just disclose that and just thinking out loud here. You would fall under that last paragraph where you had discussions, and you would disclose that before each item.
How detailed do the notes have to be of the discussion? You know, I'm not a detailed person.
That's a good question. That's something that's something that's unusual, because typically you don't have a staff member on the plant. Well, let me back up. In other states, you don't have a staff member on the
Well, I mean,
plant.
could it be just as simple as, you know, I had discussions with this applicant in the course of my job as the operations director for the city of Fairhope?
I think that would be absolutely okay. Yeah.
I think it's an excellent idea. I've been approached by several people who have come before the other planning commissions and have mentioned, our rules are not the same as the county or other municipalities, and the more transparency, the better. And if it prevents people from feeling like they have a need or a right to meet with every one of us individually and plead their case, that would be excellent.
Right.
I think so. I like the idea of the disclosure, and I think there are times when it's appropriate to meet with developers. I think there are a lot of times when it's nice to get your feet on the ground at a location, you know, where a look is worth $1 million. I try to go to every single property prior to voting on anything.
Right, Mr. Chairman, and then that's covered number 2 as well, about site visits. It's, if I can read that real quick, that's always a point of contention about site visits. I mean, if I could, I'll read it for you. It says, the conduct of site visits by members of the Planning Commission, provided that all such members conduct such visits for the specific purpose of gathering physical facts and data and without any unnecessary contact with any project proponents or opponents, residents or property owners, citizens or other interested parties, or any of their prospective representatives. And that's all, that would not be a problem. So
the difference is that if we all hear the same thing, that's great. But if we had separate meetings with people, then everybody's hearing sort of a slightly different story, and it's not on the public record.
So site meeting, we go as a group together.
No, you're just not
no, you
meeting
can
with
go as a group. But if you as a member wanted to go to a site and look at it and observe it for yourself, that's okay. Now meeting someone there,
Less than 5 of you could go
right.
at one time.
Right.
You do not have a quorum at that.
Right.
But you're going alone to look at the property, not meeting someone there, not meeting an opponent, proponent, whatever. You're going purely to gather data on physical characteristics of the site.
I'm like Lee. I go, but I go and I'll ride to the various properties, and just to see, be sure you put your eyes on them, so you know what you're talking about, what you're looking at, and then.
Definitely need to.
But that's
Not
meeting with
Right.
On that score, I try to go to all the properties too, but I don't get prior information until they get the packet, and it leaves me, 2 or 3 days to go to see all these properties. I know that you have to put all of them in, but if we could get a note of what properties are gonna be considered, whether, nothing else about them, just so we know where those properties are, I would also do, but I can't do this in.
Sure.
That's a good
24 hours.
We can, and I'll defer to Emily on this. I think once we get our agenda formulated, which is well in advance of, it's in advance. Could we send it out to everybody, Emily? Just a draft agenda?
That would be great.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah. Now, it wouldn't
For us to do our
contain
due
all the
diligence.
details and the drawings. It'd just be,
What's going
here it
on.
is, here's a site, and maybe a parcel number.
Yeah, just so we know
Yeah,
what
we
it
can do
is.
that. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And as far as meetings like when you and I met with Mac and our attorney, would those get listed as a meeting when we're working out a legal issue like that, or how?
No, and that's not a problem. I mean, that would not be something that would be an issue. And that's covered under number 1. It says written communication delivered to city staff for distribution to all members of the Planning Commission. Let me back up. That's if you get an email from someone, maybe on your private email, if you send it to us, we'll make sure it gets in all the packets. But we also discuss, I got to find it now, where to meet with staff, that's appropriate. To meet with your legal counsel, that's appropriate, not something you have to disclose. And I forgot where I put that at, but it's in the draft somewhere. But you could just meet with staff, meet with Ken. That would not be something that would be a problem.
Okay. Excellent. All right, well, I don't guess we need a motion, but it sounds like a good bit of.
We don't need a motion to.
As
Does
far
Wayne bring it, Ken, as a resolution?
We'll do it in the form of a resolution.
Okay.
Excellent.
It's just a policy.
Yeah, thanks, Art. All right, anything else for the meeting? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor, say aye. No further discussion on that one.
That's the main